Humans have been eating meat for over 2 million years. We've been apex predators for 2 million years. Why would meat be bad for us now if it hasn't been bad for us for the last 2 million years? That doesn't really make sense.
Hello, my name is Dr. Anthony Chaffee. I'm an American medical doctor specializing in neurosurgery, but I've also done quite extensive research into diet and nutrition and how that affects health and chronic disease.
You have to understand your relationship with food is pathological, that it's been driven by this industry to make you addicted to food so that they can sell their products, and they don't care if it makes you sick.
Dr. Chaffee, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We are stoked to have you back on.
Yeah, me too, man. It's good to see you guys.
Dude, it's crazy. We had you on episode 76, which was July of 22. And I feel like we're so much better now.
Yeah. What are you guys at to? What are you up to now?
Dude, it's honestly just been
hundreds now. Yeah.
I know. I think we're episode 2. This is like episode 2 something.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. That's awesome, man. Great job.
No, we appreciate it, man. It was so good to connect with you too. And I think we were saying this when we first came on the podcast, because we've been, heavy into the carnivore space for probably like 5 or 6 years. I think I was telling you I had ulcerative colitis, had a lot of success going carnivore, but it's so helpful having MDs and people that are in the medical field like yourself that are promoting this movement, because I see with my parents and family friends that are a little bit older, it's like they're probably not going to listen to me, but if there's someone like you that's an actual neurosurgeon that's been doing this for 20 plus years, they're so much more likely to listen to it. So I know we've talked about that before, but I always just think it's an interesting point that I come back to.
Well, but I think it's just as important, if not more important, to speak to people like yourselves that you've had serious medical issues that have been ameliorated by simple dietary changes, and it's a good weather vane having something like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, because there's such an acute change in your health if you eat the wrong thing, and you can see really what's happening to you in real time. You go outside of you eat a certain way and you're doing better, like, okay, but maybe that's coincidence, and you try to eat something else and all of a sudden you have bloody diarrhea. And it's like, well, that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
And so having people show that, and seeing testimonies like yourself, it's all well and good. We were talking about this sort of before we started, but it's all well and good to have a study that says something, but if it doesn't line up with reality, if it doesn't actually happen in the real world, it doesn't matter what a study says, because it's wrong. And so, studies can be made inappropriately, they can be made with vested interest, and they can just be garbage. They may just not be able to lend information in the way that they're designed and built. And so if you have a study that says, you should eat X, Y, and Z for ulcerative colitis, and then you do that and it causes a huge disaster, and you do the opposite of that and it helps. So it really doesn't matter what the study says. So it's good to see, people like yourself coming out with your stories to say, like, hey, I've done this, I've tried this. We have these two competing arguments, and you should have evidence with which to test those theories against, and you're living proof of that. You are the evidence. You've done both, and you have very clear results, and that's what we're seeing more and more and more. So it's great to have, those stories out there.
Yeah, it's like you can show me all the peer-reviewed studies that you want, but when I'm telling you that I was on drugs that were $400K a year and all I did was eat red meat, eggs, bone broth, water, and that's what got me off those drugs, I don't really care what your peer-reviewed study says. I know it works for me. And to your point, Dr. Chaffee, you were the one that taught us about, I think it was Dr. James Salisbury in the 1800s, 1900s. And you're like, this isn't anything new. He was treating soldiers with IBS and Crohn's and colitis on what was it, hot water and red meat removal diet? Was that what he was doing?
Yeah. Yeah. Just beef and water. He said lamb was distant second best, and warm water. So, he wrote a book called the Relation of Alimentation and Disease, or so the relationship, alimentation being our alimentary tract, is our digestive tract, so the relation between what we eat and the diseases that we get. And he just showed that people that were eating just more vegetables and grains is long before the processed food industry existed, long before refined sugar became such a huge marketed item, and long before seed oils really hit the market as well. So just plants. He found that people were getting diseases that other people simply weren't, and that you could remove these problems and just get rid of them by putting people on a beef and water diet. So he was sort of the first one to codify that. But it goes back millennia that we know that meat was very healing, and that you'd eat plants basically if you had to, and that may not be the best for your health. The wealthy classes pretty much every country, they would reserve the meat for themselves. And, like in England, it was those woods, that was the king's woods, it was the king's deer. You were not allowed to hunt them. You're not allowed to eat animals. You had to just subsist on, gruel and maybe a bit of dairy and rabbits if you could catch them. A lot of people in England would catch rabbits, and that's basically how they survived. And it's always been the case that the wealthier individuals that could afford meat, they were generally the healthiest people as well. And they would live longer, they were taller, better stature, better skin, teeth, health, all these other sorts of things. And, that goes back to antiquity. There was, I was reading up on like a cholera epidemic in I think it was like the 1830s. And they even noted there that meat was basically had healing properties, restorative properties, and was beneficial for people at that time. And that eating plants, vegetables, and things like that seemed to cause harm and hurt people, and they were getting more sick as a result of it. And so this is something that has been long understood to be a very important, it's necessary. We need meat. And that plants are not even secondary. They're just a survival mechanism. Just in case you can't get enough meat, then you have this alternative, which is great. I mean, that would confer a survival advantage, that we can survive on certain plants if we can't get meat, but that in no way means that it's as good as meat. And so that's something we should focus on, or comes without any harm. It's very important to remember that.
How have you had success breaking through the mainstream opinions on what people should and shouldn't be eating? Because I think, like, to what Brett was saying before, like having a doctor tell our moms what, eating red meat only, it has a totally different effect than what Brett and I can possibly say. So I'm just curious, like, how have you actually had success doing that? Because it is such an extreme opinion for most people to hear.
Well, just facts. You just stick to the facts. And the fact is that humans have been eating meat for over 2 million years. We've been apex predators for 2 million years. That's what the best evidence shows. And apex predators, by definition, are carnivores. And so the hard rule of biology is that of adaptation. We adapt to our environment, or we die and go extinct. And so we have not gone extinct. So we are clearly well adapted to eating meat and being apex predators. We would not have survived as apex predators if we could not survive as apex predators 2 million years ago. So even 2 million years ago, we were very well adapted to eating meat and to benefit from eating meat. And then that symbiotic relationship just continued on and improved as time went on, as it does. That's how biology works. And so you just stick to the facts. Biology is a hard science. Nutritional studies are not. They're not even science in a lot of cases. Some more propaganda. 11 times, or Coca-Cola spends 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research per year than the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. And that's just Coca-Cola. That's not PepsiCo, Nestle, General Mills, Kellogg's, all the other, major food brands. So the vast majority of studies published in nutrition are coming from conflicted sources. And that's not even to say the NIH is a pure entity in and of itself. A lot of them have corporate ties and get money and above the table or under the table. And so, and a lot of so-called independent researchers have a lot of conflicts as well. The main vegan nutritional researchers, such as Dr. Gardner at Stanford and Dr. Walter Willett at Harvard, are both, self-proclaimed vegans, have been for decades. So they have an ideological bias from the beginning, but they also have extreme conflicts of interest and financial conflicts of interest with the processed food industry and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who are religiously anti-meat. I know Dr. Willett, I don't know if he's involved with the church, but I know that he's done a lot of work with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so, these are conflicts of interest. And so you just sidestep that and you just talk about facts. And you talk about how this is how humans have been designed. Most people understand that because we've all been taught that. And that's what the evidence shows, is that humans have been carnivores. So why would meat be bad for us now if it hasn't been bad for us for the last 2 million years? That doesn't really make sense. And we've just improved and gotten better and taller and smarter and stronger over the past 2 million years. And then something happened around 10, 15,000 years ago, and our brain just went and dropped by 11%. That coincided exactly with agriculture. And so you look at the skeletal remains and you just say, okay, well, before agriculture, people were 5 inches taller. Males had 11% larger brains. Females had 17% larger brains. And they had perfect straight teeth, big wide jaws, and perfectly developed in signs of poor wound healing or infectious disease such as tuberculosis. And immediately after agriculture, that's exactly what you find. It didn't take hundreds of years. It didn't take thousands of years. It was immediate. And it happened exactly the same way everywhere on earth, regardless of the time, regardless of the food crop that they ended up transitioning to. And we saw this in real time in the last 100 years with the Plains Indians in America. When the American government killed off all the bison, they were just high-fat carnivores. They were just eating bison and pemmican the whole year. And there's a study in 2001 that showed that the Plains Indians in America, just eating bison in the 1800s, were the tallest human beings on Earth. Wow. No one else was taller. People, oh my, even the Dutch. Yes, even the Dutch. They were taller than everybody. And so they were just eating the most meat. Now they are not. They switched over, and you saw that same decrease nearly instantly when you started eating a lot less meat and a lot more plants. And this, again, before processed foods came into play. And now processed food is a major component of everyone's diet in America. They're actually hit a lot harder. They have a much higher prevalence of chronic disease, obesity, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and the rest. So they're being much more strongly impacted. We're seeing this in real time. We're seeing what we saw in the fossil record in real time right now with the Native Americans, with the Native Australians, with the Maasai. They've been getting more and more sick over the past century. Studies in the early 1900s, 1920s, 1930s showing that they were extremely healthy. They were 5 inches taller than their compatriots, the Akikuyu, who were eating largely whole food, plant-based diet. And so the exact same disparities that we saw in the fossil record, we're seeing in real life people in between the ones that are eating animal-based and the ones that are eating plant-based. And then as the 20th century goes on, and they're very healthy, especially the male Maasai, they were the healthiest out of everyone looked at, males, females from both tribes. And the males were the healthiest. They ate the most blood, ate the most meat. And the women would have a bit more milk, a lot more milk, and maybe have a bit of plants. And that was new too. That was a new introduction. They just, in the 1920s, they just started eating more millet grains. And that was new. That was a new addition. That was specifically noted in the study that was a new addition, a new recent addition. They were still very healthy. Then you get to the 1970s, and their health starts declining. They had no signs of heart disease, no mention of heart disease in that study in the 1920s and 30s. And then in the 1970s, all of a sudden they're, oh yeah, look at this. They're starting to get heart disease. And now they have higher rates of diabetes and teeth problems. They have Coca-Cola trucks going in every day, and they sell out of Coca-Cola within, a few minutes, because they have no idea this stuff is so bad for them. Now their diabetes rates are actually a real problem. Now they're damaging their teeth. So they're not living their natural lifestyle. They're not eating their natural diet, and they're getting sicker. So we're seeing this happen in real time. And you can point this out to people, and you can point out the fact that meat was wrongly vilified. It was, there's hard evidence that this was fraudulently vilified by the major food manufacturers, the sugar companies, the Sugar Association, Sugar Research Foundation. And, we have hard evidence of that. That's been published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016, actual internal memos from the sugar companies talking about how they were perpetrating this fraud on people, to have Harvard professors and others falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was more likely to be sugar. There were strong associative studies showing that there was a clear association between heart disease and sugar and seed oils. And so they're like, okay, well, we need to get opposition research out there, just like the tobacco companies have done for decades. They say, oh, well, our studies show that, it doesn't cause emphysema, it's not addictive, and it doesn't cause cancer and all these sorts of things. And they knew that it did. And that's why they got, fined for like $400 billion or something like that when those tobacco memos came out. They had memos for 30 years of the tobacco companies showing that they knew exactly what was going on, and they were just trying to protect their interest, which sort of, to me, I think that should be a criminal act at that point. They're knowingly causing harm. They're knowingly keeping a product out there and saying that it's safe when they know it's not. And they're harming people and they're killing people. Like, how is that not a criminal offense? I mean, that should not be just a $400 billion fine. I mean, first of all, they made trillions during that time. So like, what's 400 billion? But they should have been in prison. You know, first of all, they lied under oath, they perjured themselves, and they knowingly caused harm to hundreds of millions of people. And so that should be criminal. Same thing with sugar. You know, they know this stuff is causing harm. They've known it, you know, for probably 70, 80 years. And they've been putting out counter research as a result of that. So you point out all these things. You point out that, you know, the arguments that they have are largely fraudulent or based on fraudulent ideas and studies, and you show the sort of hard evidence. Because it doesn't matter what a study said, like you said, it matters what happens in real life. Okay, well, what happens in real life when the Inuit just eat blubber, fat, and meat? They're healthy as hell. What happens when they stop eating that and they start eating more plants and processed foods? Throughout the 20th century, you just saw them getting a little bit higher rates of heart disease and cancer and chronic disease. But even into the 1990s, they still had lower rates of heart disease than the rest of Canada. And so there was a study, I believe in 1996, that said, okay, well, you know, maybe there's some sort of genetic factor here that they're specially adapted to eating this sort of diet. Well, if you think about it, we're the adaptations. Europeans and other populations that have had agriculture for 10,000 years, we're the adaptations. They are living in the same way that we've been living for 2 million years throughout the ice ages, right? So they're the original. We're the adaptations. And so they looked at it and they found that no, they don't have any genetic defenses against heart disease. They're actually more predisposed to getting heart disease. So we've developed some defenses against developing heart disease, and they haven't done any, right? Because they don't need to, because meat does not cause heart disease. And then in the 2000s and 2010s, you start seeing studies pop up. So, oh, well, you know, everyone says that the Inuit have lower rates of heart disease, but, you know, they don't actually. Look at this, their heart disease rate's higher. You're like, yeah, idiot. Now, because they're eating a whole bunch of garbage that they're not supposed to eat. But you go back, if they're only eating, and if you distinguish out between the people that are eating modern diets, living in the cities, doing what you do in cities, distinguish that between the population only eating what they're supposed to eat, just meat, it's a very different story. And so you can see that in real time with Maasai. You can see that in real time with the Inuit and the Native Americans. And so, you know, you make this claim and you say, okay, well, you know, this should get worse. But in all the populations that are doing this, we're actually seeing the exact opposite. So these things are just simply wrong. And you point these things out, and most people will have specific, well, what about cholesterol? What about fiber? What about nutrients? And there's answers for all of these things. So you just systematically go through them. But I mean, it's just, these are the facts. You know, humans are carnivores as a species. It's just the kind of animal we are. And as such, we don't have robust defenses against plant toxins, and they're best to be avoided.
I feel like when I'm hearing you speak, Dr. Chaffee, it makes me think about when people are saying that we're evolutionarily omnivores. I think it's actually a cop-out answer the more that I think about it. And I think there's so much, it almost seems like tribalism between vegans and carnivores. So I think it's easy for a health influencer to be like, well, we're evolutionarily omnivores. That way I'm not that polarizing. I can kind of maintain sway to both sides of the equation. But to your point, it's like evolutionarily, we've been eating meat for over 2 million years. It's the introduction of plants that have really hurt our health overall. And probably if you are an omnivore, because you're eating so much meat, that probably will offset some of the negative side effects of a plant-based diet. But it's really meat is what we're supposed to be eating. So everything else has just been introduction from modern society.
Yeah. And you know, it does depend on your definition of an omnivore. Well, first of all, the definition of a carnivore or hypercarnivore or an obligate carnivore is an animal that eats over 70% of it gets over 70% of its calories from meat, right? And so cats are obligate carnivores, right? But so are we, right? I mean, most humans living naturally would just eat meat. You know, you have these shows like what is it, like Alive or something like that, where they go out, they put these people out in just like some remote, you know, wilderness area, and you just have to survive. How many of those guys are vegan? Right? They're all eating meat. They're all hunting, trapping, fishing. And that's just like, this is important. We need the fat. We need the meat. This is how you survive out here. I would bet that even the staunchest vegan out there And maybe some people can take up, like, the Simon Hills of the world can go out and say, okay, you go on that show and see if you can survive on a vegan diet, see how far you get. It's not going to, you're going to be tapping out in the first couple of days, like it's not going to work. It's not compatible for life. You cannot live in the wild, living on plants like that, to any real extent. It's just, you have to get meat. So when we are out in the wild, that's what we're eating. We're eating meat. And historically, before agriculture, that's what we were eating. The way we ate had to change because the megafauna died out. And so most people didn't have access to meat, such as the Plains Indians, where they still had 100 million buffalo roaming around and migrating through, and they could get a year's worth of meat in one buffalo drop. And so, most people didn't have that. And so they had to go to other means. And agriculture was one of those survival mechanisms, which allowed them to survive, but it didn't come without a cost. Omnivore, you could eat both, but is it optimal to eat both? That's the important thing. Or does something make you an omnivore because you just can eat plants and animals, right? Because cats can do that too. They can get up to 60% or so of their calories from carbohydrates, and they can survive, right? But they are termed obligate carnivores. And dogs, same thing. A lot of they're not as sensitive to the toxins in plants as felines, but they still die from a lot of things that we would be able to weather. So just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do something. And just because you can eat plants does not make you an omnivore. And certainly doesn't make you an herbivore just because you can survive on it. So I think it's important to distinguish that and distinguish what we mean by omnivore and carnivore. I mean that humans are carnivores because we are optimized by a carnivore diet. Our health is optimal and optimized by eating exclusively fatty meat and exclusively drinking water. I think that we can survive, and most people can do just fine, including some plants, but that does not mean that that's optimal. And that's the important distinction there. Are we omnivores because we could eat plants? Okay, fine. If you want to, make that distinction, but the distinction I make is what we can eat that will optimize our health. And you cannot optimize your health on an omnivorous diet.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that a lot of people don't even really know what it feels like to optimize for diet and lifestyle. Like I think part of the main ethos of our show has been trying to like really inspire people to get more curious and actually experiment with their own health, particularly around diet, because most people just hear something or read something and then they use that as a validation for them just to like not try to tinker. And it's really sad. Like I just feel like most people just get like trapped in like the palatability of processed foods, and then they never really want to go experiment and optimize their health. It's obviously a generalization, but I just feel like so many people fall into that trap.
It's easy to, I mean, the stuff is made to be extremely addictive. That's what food science is. We sort of look at these things through rose-colored glasses, where we think, well, food scientists are out there trying to make food healthy and perfect and wonderful. That's not what they're doing. They're trying to make things addictive and palatable and make it so you want to eat more of it, so they sell more product. This is a product development science, and they're using very technical scientific means to do that. And it's very interesting, what they're able to do. Is very clever people figuring out very clever things, but the purpose is not to make things more healthy. It's to make things more addictive, more palatable, and consumed at a higher level. There was a 60 Minutes story on exactly that. And they went to these food scientists, and they were making these natural flavors. What natural flavors were actually, they took out the different sort of flavor chemicals from like an orange or cheese or something like that, and they mimicked it. So it's actually not natural. It's actually not a natural compound necessarily. They're just getting compounds that mimic that. But they design it in a special way. So they find molecules that, first of all, if these are new molecules, they're not sort of just using actual natural things. We don't know what these things are. And so you're introducing chemicals into your body that are not supposed to be there. They don't exist in nature necessarily. And there's like trans fats, they don't exist in nature. Our bodies don't know what to do with them. So these just get deposited all over our arteries. And this was a major driver of heart disease. And so, you have to be very, very careful and circumspect when you're introducing chemicals into your body that didn't exist 50,000 years ago during an ice age. That's my sort of distinction. We weren't eating this. We weren't putting this in our body 50,000 years ago during an ice age. Probably best to avoid, at least to be safe. So they get these chemicals, and what they're trying to do, they're trying to front load the flavor. So you get this big burst of flavor and it goes away quickly, because they don't want that flavor to linger, because then you have this nice taste in your mouth. You're like, oh, that's nice. And you don't need to eat more. You want that big taste. You go, wow, I like that. And then it goes away. And then you have to go eat another chip and another candy and another this and another that. And that's what they're doing. And they said this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get that big burst of exciting flavor, and it goes away quickly so that you want more. And it becomes sort of addictive at that point, because you're just using more of the product. So that's what they're trying to do. And so, they've done a good job. And so a lot of people are addicted to these things. They are addicted to this flavor experience. And people say, oh, I couldn't do that because it couldn't do a carnivore diet because it just sounds so restricted. It sounds so boring. Food's not supposed to be entertainment. It's not supposed to be, you go out to an event and your event is eating things. I mean, that's sort of sick, honestly. It's that's not how it's supposed to be. Food is nutrition, food is energy, and then you use that to live your life and have a life. If your life revolves around just eating, there's a problem. And that's it's honestly, it's a bit unfortunate when people are stuck in that, where they're just their main entertainment throughout the day is just eating things. And I think that that's a very important thing to get away from. Food addiction is a major issue. And so, you're right to point that out. It's difficult for people to get away from this because they are addicted to food. And having food addiction and addressing food addiction, I think, is one of the main benefits of going carnivore, and something you have to do. You have to understand your relationship with food is pathological, that it's been driven by this industry to make you addicted to food so that they can sell their products. And they don't care if it makes you sick. They know it makes you sick, but they're fine with that because they're heavily invested in pharmaceutical companies that sell you the medications to paper over that sickness, that metabolic distress and illness. So it's a matter of recognizing that you are addicted to food, and that you have an unhealthy relationship with food, and that you can enjoy your food. I've enjoyed every single steak I've ever eaten. If it doesn't taste good, you're not hungry. I mean, that's the whole idea. The problem with hyperpalatable food is it's designed to always taste good, regardless of whether you're hungry or not. And it triggers hunger signals, and it raises insulin, and it blocks leptin, and it does all these things to make you eat more. And so it is difficult for people to get away from. You need to sort of recognize that you're in that situation before you can break out of it.
Yeah. My mom made a prime rib on New Year's Day, prime rib with like some salt and French butter. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, you're telling me that not only is this the most delicious thing I've ever had, it's also the most nutritious thing for me too. And it's that mindset shift, Dr. Chaffee, that I think is so powerful. One of my favorite pieces of content that you've ever done, it was a clip you were on some in-person podcast. I think it was in Australia, and the clip went really viral. It was basically you talking about the benefits of a carnivore diet. And you were basically like, eat these foods for 2 weeks, and you're going to be amazed at how good you're going to feel. And not only are you going to be amazed, you're actually going to be pissed off that you didn't do this for longer in your life. And it's like, I think it's tough because the three of us know how good you feel. It's like you get shredded, your mental acuity is amazing, your gut health is amazing, you're flooding the body with nutrients, but it's tough to describe that for someone that doesn't have that comparison of going from processed foods to then evolutionarily consistent carnivore foods. But if we could get them to focus on what the role of food actually is, it's not for entertainment, it's for purpose. Oh, and also once you rewire your taste buds, it's going to be delicious and it's super easy to follow. I think that's like the big ticket item that you just hit in on, that like, hopefully we can just make that more mainstream.
Yeah, well, it'd be great if people did get that. I mean, most people find that they get such a dramatic improvement in their health and how they feel within a few weeks or a month or two. Some people take a bit longer, but most people will feel a lot better in that time period. Like in 2 weeks, they feel better than they ever have. In a month, they're just like, this is amazing. And that's not that long. I mean, you can, Jordan Peterson said when his daughter Michaela sort of talked him into doing just meat and water only. He's like, all right, well, I can try for 30 days. You can do anything for 30 days. And if this is going to affect, the grand scheme of your life, if this can, really improve your life, then why not? And so I think it's really important to just sort of encourage people, like, things like now it's like World Carnivore Month. Just try it for 30 days, see how you feel. You are going to feel better. You should. The vast majority of people will feel dramatically better. Others, may have a bit more of a teething issue, and it can take a couple months, but everybody eventually will feel better than they ever have. And they get to the point where you look back on your life and you realize that you felt like garbage your entire life. Even though you thought you felt good, now you see the comparison. Now you see what good actually feels like, and it will piss you off. It pissed me off. I was 38, and I remember looking back those 5 years that I was just not eating plants because plants had toxins, and I was just like, I'm not going to eat them. And I felt absolutely outstanding. I've never felt better. I've never played better, rugby, athletics, anything else. And during that period, and I remember always trying to get back to that. I was like, what was that? There's just this Zen moment where just this perfect zone of health and athleticism. And it's like, how the hell do I get back to that? I was like, well, I'm just too old now, and I just will never get back. At 25, I thought that. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? I guess I'm just over the hill now. And but looking back, at 25 was when I slipped off the meat only diet. And then at 38, I went like, that's it. Like that period of time was like, we're carnivores. And that's when I was eating as a carnivore. My body was working the way it's supposed to work. I got rid of the plants. I wasn't eating processed food either. I was just eating meat, but lean meat, and not getting enough fat, not getting enough meat, and also just eating whole vegetables, rarely any fruit. I naturally avoided carbs just because I noticed that my back hurt more. I got soreness and stiffness more when I would eat things with carbohydrates. So I'm like, okay, I'm just not going to eat that crap. And so it's just vegetables and meat, and that was it. And I didn't feel great. And I felt I'm just 38, I'm just middle-aged, and it's just like, that's it. I'm just dying. I'm on my way out. And that's not the case. I stopped eating greens and I started eating a lot more fatty meat. And within 2 weeks, I lost 23 pounds, and I felt like I was 22 again. And I went back out and started playing rugby again, with the top team here in Seattle. And I felt great. I felt like I was 22 again. I could just run and sprint as hard as I could forever. I'd never ran out of energy, and I was completely out of shape. And yet I was able to keep up with all the professional athletes that had been training. It was mid-season, they were all in great shape. I was not in great shape, but my diet was such that I could keep up and that I could do everything that I needed to, which was great. So, I looked back on my life and realized that I could have been feeling like that my entire life. And I was pissed off because I was robbed of my birthright. I was robbed of feeling good. And everyone has been. Everyone's been robbed of that. Everyone's been robbed of good health. The natural state of human beings is that of good health. The natural state of all animals is that of good health. If you have just an entire population of sickly animals, they're going to die out. We're in a position now that we're sort of anchored in, because of our civilization and our industry, but our health is extremely poor, and that would never have worked in the wild. You just cannot survive in poor health. Now, the argument is that meat is actually causing these chronic diseases. And I made this point, that people like Simon Hill and others will say that, well, meat causes these diseases, meat causes this illness. And, people were dying, young, and this, that, and the other. And just because we were eating meat for 2 million years, it doesn't mean that we're adapted to it. Well, first of all, it does actually. And second of all, you say, oh, well, people could have died just right after they gave birth. I'm like, who's raising the kids? And there's like generational benefits to having your grandparents, great grandparents, and things like that. And that's what we saw in anthropological studies with the Native Americans, Native Australians, and others, that you had 4 generations up. You had people there, and the wise men and things like that they're making the decisions, and then the younger people going out and hunting, but the older people would go out hunting too. So that it just doesn't, that conflicts with the observed phenomena. But they were saying, well, maybe you weren't adapted to meat and it was making you sick. And so people were dying shortly after they had kids and raised those kids. And so I pointed out that, that it didn't make sense for a lot of reasons, but we didn't see signs of chronic diseases and heart disease and diabetes and all these sorts of things in the pre-agricultural record. And then Simon Hill said, "Oh, I never said that. I never said that they got chronic disease. I said that when people died of lions and starvation, this, that, and the other." I was like, okay, hold on a second. You said that we didn't adapt to meat and that meat causes disease. That means that they would have had to have been getting these chronic diseases that we're getting now that you're attributing to meat. And so if we're exclusively eating meat or predominantly eating meat, obviously we'd be getting all of these diseases. So, even their own internal, their arguments are internally conflicted, and so it's, it's just sort of interesting to sort of see these sort of mental gymnastics to try to jump around, and go away from the observed reality and facts, which is that we've been eating meat and we've been thriving as a result of that.
It's funny. It feels like the vegan movement is very forward looking in the sense that they're trying to pull answers out from science that hasn't been discovered yet. And the carnivore movement is very much focused on this ancestral way of living, which is like, let's just redesign a blueprint around what we would have been eating, for centuries. I think it seems like veganism is very much more propped up on like this new age of science.
Well, and also, it's called fudge factors. I mean, you say, well, if this were the case that humans were designed to eat plants, which is like, no one's even suggested this, outside of the last like 10 years or so. No one outside of an insane asylum has suggested that outside of the last 10 years. I mean, no, everyone has accepted that, and paleoanthropologists and things like that. There's one guy that Simon Hill brings on. It's, oh, well, this is the guy you listen to. Okay, well, he's like the only one in that field that is saying that, and that's fine. He could be right. He could be the only one who's correct in that field. But the things that he does are clearly incorrect. They're going to the Hadza and saying, oh, well, this is how people were eating back then because this is how hunter-gatherers eat now. No. Just because the Hadza eat that way now doesn't mean that we were eating that way during the ice ages. The Maasai eat differently to the Hadza. The Native Australians eat different to both of them. The Native Americans and Plains Indians who were only eating bison were eating different to all of the above. So you can't actually say that. The Inuit, those guys would be likely eating very closely to how we were eating during the ice ages because there's nothing else available during the ice ages. And they were arguing, oh, well, you still shouldn't eat fat, even though we were eating more meat. Wouldn't eat fat. Game is very lean. How lean is a seal? Not very. How lean is a whale? Not really. How lean is a mammoth? Because that's what we were eating. What about a giant sloth? The larger an animal is, the larger the proportion of body fat that they have generally. And this is why we'd go after the megafauna, because we wanted the fat and we went after the fat. And so it wasn't until we lost that and then we started turning other things. We started cooking and cracking open marrow bones, which is very labor intensive, but that's where fat is, and we needed the fat. And like pemmican, we get dried meat and mix it with an equal portion of rendered fat, and that's about 80% calories from fat. So it's very high fat everywhere you go when you look back. And so those are just they're just trying to fit an ideology. And so they're fudge factors. They're trying to just fake something, and so then they'll say, okay, look at disproven here. Okay, but well, if we look at this, we'll just need these studies, but this is going to come out, and then something else comes out, proves them wrong, and they pivot to something else because their ideology is sacrosanct. That can never be shaken. It's like, it doesn't matter what the facts and the evidence say. There's always something, oh, it has to be, I know it's true. And I've even heard this with this sort of circular logic with physics. There was a professor from Berkeley that I saw on a some sort of space documentary sort of thing, astrophysics sort of thing, and they said, we know that dark matter exists. Dark matter, if it's dark because you can't measure it or recognize it at all ever, right? But for their equations to work, 97% of the universe has to be made up of dark matter, which can never be measured or seen, right? It's pretty convenient. It's just this magical stuff that doesn't behave as matter otherwise, but it's the predominant, matter stuff in the universe. And then that didn't work either. And so that 76% had to be made up of dark energy, which is energy that we don't know what it is. It's not magnetic force. It's not electricity. It's not anything. It's something else. And it's the major energy source in the world, even though you can't measure it, you can't see it. These are fudge factors, and this professor from Berkeley said, well, we know that dark matter exists because if dark matter didn't exist, then the Big Bang could not have happened. And since we know the Big Bang happened, therefore we know that dark matter exists. And it's like, well, hold on a second. You're saying yourself that if dark matter didn't exist and the Big Bang couldn't happen, it would disprove that. So what is your evidence that the Big Bang existed? Well, it's all these fudge factors. There's actually a lot of equations that show that no, it really probably didn't exist. And there's whole factions in physics that actually say, there's a book written called The Big Bang Never Happened. It's very clear. And there's a documentary of the same name. It's very interesting. And there's some Nobel Prize winning top physicists and researchers in the world that are saying that like this is against the observed phenomena and facts. And they have these fudge factors. And say, okay, well, dark matter. It's like, okay, well, there should be this much matter, there should be this much gravity, there should be this much. And then they go and observe it, and it gives them 10, 20 years. And then you get the equipment to measure it, and it's like, oh, it's off. Okay, bet you there's dark matter. Okay, now we'll start measuring things, and like, oh, no, that's not even enough. Probably dark energy too. And they just keep doing this. So the vegans keep doing this as well. They have an ideology. They'll be damned if that's ever going to change. They know that it's true because, obviously they're brilliant, smart, wonderful people. And if they believe it, then it must be true, and so they're just looking for reasons to make it so. And so that's why they're looking for, they're like, well, this is going to turn out. And then it turns out that it's not a problem. And so, okay, well, but this other thing that's going to happen. They're just clinging to rocks, in a storm. But it's eventually the storm's going to get them. I mean, the preponderance of evidence is completely against them. And so they can say these things all they want, but the evidence is totally against them. And eventually, the truth will out.
Yeah. When you speak, there's so much conviction behind what you're saying, which intuitively makes so much sense, because Harry and I know that you've done so much research over the last decade to support what you're talking about. I'm just curious for the listener, are there any like esoteric or not super well-known books on health, nutrition, meat that most people don't know about that you really like, that have taught you a lot about your current beliefs around, us being evolutionarily carnivores?
Well, I think a lot of those ones like Dr. Salisbury's, I mean, a lot of these things are very interesting. I think they supported, a lot of what you'd observe in reality. You put people on, this is why I think that the truth will eventually, come to bear, is because more and more people are trying this. This is getting more and more attention, and even mainstream sort of channels that are detracting from this, saying, oh, this is dead, this is horrible, well, only kooks would do this. And, quack doctors and things like that, they at least have to talk about it. And so, it's getting popular enough that they have to address it, even if just to detract from it. And more and more people trying it. That's saying and not what they're saying. People pay attention to that. Like you said, it doesn't matter what any study says. If you're telling me to eat like that and that's going to improve my ulcerative colitis, and it doesn't, it makes it worse. And then eating the opposite now studies and biology and fit together. I think it's very, very interesting to see that other people have come to those exact same conclusions, and with similar evidence, but different evidence, because we had difference available in the 1800s. And Salisbury did a 30-year research project onto the best nutrition for humans. He lived with the Plains Indians, saw that they were living to be 115, 120 years old, and in great health. They weren't just turning to dust slowly over 40 years in a nursing home. They were active, healthy adults at 110, 115. And that seems far-fetched. They were just making it up. Well, maybe, but if they were, it's a very coincidental number, because we know as geneticists that we are designed to live 120 years on average, meaning that if you just stay out of your own way and don't mess up or get killed by something, you should make it to 120 without doing anything special. So why are we dying in our 60s and 70s? And why wouldn't it be the case that people living in a natural state and not being killed by anything wouldn't make it to 110, 115, 120 years, 130 years, right? And they were. And a lot of these different indigenous populations, even going back to, the ancient Greeks and the Ethiopians and the Persians, Herodotus, the first historian, chronicled that the Ethiopians talking to the Persians said they ate bread and grains and they lived about 70 years. And then the Ethiopians said, well, actually, we only eat meat. We only drink water and milk if we're not drinking water. And we'd live 120 years, some people much longer. And again, it's exactly that. It's 120 years. So, it's interesting when you see that and you see things like Dr. Salisbury. That's amazing. He was studying this and he was saying, okay, what is the best thing for people to eat? And he's noticing, hey, look, not only is it better to eat meat, but these diseases go away if you stop eating plants. And then the works of Vilhjalmur Stefansson, who lived with the Inuit, traveled with them, lived with them for like 12 years, learned their language, learned their culture, wrote a lot of books. He wrote one book called The Fat of the Land. And just talking about like, this is how we're supposed to eat. We're supposed to eat fatty meat. This is how we do best. And the polar explorers knew this. If you went up there and you didn't just eat a high fat carnivore diet, you were going to die. And many people did. And then when they switched, or they had serious nutritional deficiencies and health issues, and then they got rid of all the other crap they were eating and just gave them fatty meat and fish, and they recovered. Right. And so, this is again, you go out in the wild, you're not going to survive on a vegetarian diet. You're just not. And you'll be very harmed and potentially die if you try that. And, so, you're seeing this in real time. The Stefansson was seeing that in himself and in the people there, that this was very healthy. And he wrote another book called, Is Cancer a Disease of Civilization? I believe that's the name. Basically showing this, like, these indigenous populations, they only eat meat. Not only are they healthier in other respects, they just don't get cancer. Yeah. And the cancer rates in the Inuit were extremely low throughout the 20th century, and they were eating other things as well. And again, you saw the change in health happen in real time. There are studies that sort of look at a 20-year chunk, 1920 to 1940, say. I forget the actual dates, but there are a series of studies that sort of looked at 20-year chunks with the Inuit population and cancer rates. It's very, very low towards the beginning of the 20th century, if really any at all. And every 20 years, it's just a little bit higher and a little bit higher and a little bit higher and a little bit higher. And now it's higher and higher now, the more they involve themselves in Western society. So I think looking at those are fantastic. They're looking at these populations alive at that time. They were eating a high-fat carnivore diet, and they're showing this is what they were like. This is how long they lived. This is what their health was like. Another one would have been Weston A. Price, who went around to these. He was a dentist in the early 1900s, and he retired and started traveling. And he found there was a lot of these indigenous populations had perfectly formed teeth, perfectly formed jaws, no cavities, no crooked teeth. And he was like, this is crazy. You don't see this. And then he was seeing people near them that had horrible teeth, rotting teeth, crooked teeth, small, micrognathias, small jaw, and crooked, nasty teeth as a result, impacted wisdom teeth, all these other sorts of things. And you see that in families. You have one person have beautiful, facial development and teeth, and the other ones would have crooked, nasty teeth. And he found that it was actually, he thought it was nutritional deficiencies, and that you weren't getting these fat soluble vitamins like vitamin K2, vitamin D3, and calcium. You weren't getting enough of these things from a plant-based diet. And you give them raw milk, you give them meat, and you actually reverse these issues if they're young enough and they're still developing. And so that's something we know now as well. It's in the current dentistry literature. I found studies and papers published in recent times talking about how crooked teeth are not genetic. Pre-agriculture, no one had crooked teeth. Everyone got their wisdom teeth in, and they didn't really have signs of rotting, decaying teeth. Now, obviously, we do. And immediately after agriculture, we did. And so, again, they identified K2, D3, and calcium as major as major factors, if you have a deficiency of them, that you can get, crooked teeth and misdevelopment of your jaw and face. And so Price was, seeing this again in real time, and he was showing you pictures of, someone from India who had been, hunter gatherer, if you want to call it, but eating a lot of meat, big strong jaw, perfectly straight teeth, wisdom teeth in. Then that person moved to England, and his son, smaller jaw, recessed chin, crooked teeth, impacted wisdom teeth. His son, even smaller jaw, worse teeth, all these sorts of things. So it's not genetic, right? It's just one generation after the next, just worse, right? So it's and they were breeding with other Indian, ethnically Indian people. It wasn't like they were breeding with other ethnic communities. And so but their teeth and their jaws were getting worse and worse and worse, and he was seeing this in families as well. And you see this in people. I saw it in my family. My little brother was a very picky eater, would only eat sort of rice and tempura sauce. He needed braces, and none of us did. My sister went vegetarian sort of as an early teenager because I actually don't know the reason, but she started eating a lot more plants, and that she got over that. But she needed braces as well. No one else in my family needed braces, and it lines up with the observed facts. So I think those sorts of books are fantastic, and they're little known about, but they were quite seminal works. Salisbury actually made a huge splash at the time, and he influenced a lot of people to go on really just meat only diets, and especially for health reasons. Some people call it like the first fad diet, the Salisbury diet. But you can't call something a fad diet if you've been eating it for 2 million years, right? What you've been eating for 2 million years is by definition not a fad diet. A fad diet is restrictive. You're not eating what you should. You're not getting all the nutrition you need, and you're very restrictive. You're limiting, and it only lasts a short period of time, and people realize, wow, that was a bad idea, and you move on. Okay, so 2 million years, obviously, it's not a short duration, and it has everything you need in the proportion that you need it, because it's what we're designed to eat. And eating plants, and certainly eating processed foods, that's the fad. That's new. We've always been eating meat. That's established. Plants, that's the fad. And so I think these sorts of books are excellent reminders of that. There's even a more recent one by Dr. Voegelin called The Stone Age Diet. That was in 1975. And he was a gastroenterologist, and he argued that humans were carnivores. And he's like, look, we're carnivores. This is what we're supposed to be eating. And sort of the first paleo diet, the Stone Age diet, sort of the idea of a paleo diet. We should be eating what Paleolithic man ate. Well, he didn't eat a bunch of roots and tubers and things. He ate meat when he could get it. And certainly during the Ice Ages, there wasn't really anything else to get. So you got meat or you died. And so Voegelin wrote the book, The Stone Age Diet. He just made that point and say, look, we're carnivores. Here's the evidence for that. And there are diseases like I would treat in gastroenterology that would not exist if you didn't eat plants. Basically made the argument, to paraphrase, that if that his profession of gastroenterology, his specialty, didn't need to exist if you didn't eat plants. And that's something that you've noticed yourself. I'm sure you've had your fill of gastroenterologists throughout your life, and then all of a sudden you stopped eating plants, and I don't know if you've ever needed to see one again.
No, I got I think the last time I saw him was 2021. That was my last colonoscopy. I haven't had to go back. I've been completely drug-free for over 2 years. I'm the only patient out of the thousands of patients that he's worked with that hasn't had that happen before. So I said to him, I'm like, do you want the playbook of what I've done? Because it works super well for me. It's worked for my friends that also have autoimmune issues. And he's like, no, if you want to send it, you can, but didn't even care. And I'm like, you've seen thousands of patients over 20 years. Don't you want to know what could potentially work to get these other patients off their drugs? But just totally mindset. So I try not to argue it too much, but I do think about that a lot.
That's really sad. It's you do see that. I mean, you would hope that doctors would react like my mom's doctor did when she reversed her diabetes in 2 months.
Wow.
And he just said, diabetes is a progressive disease. It only gets worse. We mitigate it. We can slow it down with diet, lifestyle, medication, but it only gets worse. It does not go backwards. And she did. She reversed it. She came off her medications, came off her insulin, and her HbA1c went down to normal levels within 2 months. And so her doctor's like, how the hell did you do this? This is not supposed to happen. So she was very interested. She's like, I want to know what happened. I want to know what you did. So I would hope that more doctors do respond like that. And some do, some, to give them credit, and others, unfortunately, yeah, if you didn't learn it in residency, if you didn't learn it during your specialization or during medical school, it means it's not real. It doesn't exist, because obviously you would have been taught everything that's real. And this is the scientific endeavor and everything, but forgetting to realize that most of what you learn in medical school will be obsolete by the time you finish medical school. And the things you learn in residency will be built upon, improved upon, and changed by the time you finish residency, and so it's ever evolving, and you can't sit still. And if you observe a massive improvement, someone says, hey, I did this very different thing and I got very different results, it behooves you as a medical practitioner to investigate that. And I think more people are. And I think when more clinicians, get more and more interested in this and look at this and try this with their patients and go, oh crap, this actually works. Objectively, this is improving their diseases and their health. They're going to be influencing more and more of their colleagues as well. And at least it's going to be more heard of. And so maybe by now, carnivore diet's making a bit more mainstream news. More people are doing this, and that your gastroenterologist go like, I had that patient, he really improved on this. Maybe I should look into it. Hopefully, eventually they'll come around. I did talk to someone who had GBM, glioblastoma brain cancer, who tried, keto carnivore diets, and basically their doctor was like, yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just a fluke, but you're going to die. It's invariably fatal. And 10 years down the road, sort of the last time they saw them, the doctor was retiring and just said, hey, listen, I made a mistake. This obviously means something. I want to know everything you did and everything about it. What can you tell me? And he literally just took notes with him, just sat with him for a couple hours and just took notes on it. So eventually he came around. He realized that, wow, this is something that could have helped my patients. Unfortunately, from the sounds of it, he was retiring at that point, but hopefully he was able to pass that on to his colleagues, or impart that on, what patients he saw before he did finish off retiring, or maybe stayed in practice. But I think it will happen. Unfortunately, people, just like you're tied into food addiction is just the way that you're used to eating. Also, people are used to practicing medicine the way that they've been taught to practice medicine. And you just get in that rut. No, well, this is just how you treat this disease. That's just how it is. And until all my colleagues tell me, oh, no, we want to do this differently, they just basically toe the line. And unfortunately, a lot of doctors practice guideline medicine as opposed to evidence-based medicine. Evidence-based, one doctor, in a book, wrote a book called Better. He also wrote Complications and other sorts of books. A guy named Dr. Atul Gawande, who's a professor of surgery at Harvard, and he's at Brigham's Women's Hospital, or at least he was. And he's specializes in oncological general surgery. So he'll take out different sorts of adrenal tumors and things like that. And so very good writer, very interesting guy. Wouldn't necessarily agree with everything that he's concluded, but excellent information and excellent, very interesting. Funny enough, the first season of Grey's Anatomy, like all the medical stories and things came directly out of his first book, Complications. I mean, it was like word for word. And I was like, they better paid that guy for that, because they just robbed his book. It's an interesting guy, very interesting stories, and very, very good writer. And he wrote about a doctor in that his second book called Better that treated cystic fibrosis, and he had very different outcomes, and he did very different things, and he had the best sort of outcomes and best rates of treating people with cystic fibrosis. He had a patient who's like 63 and symptom free, well, essentially, living a normal life at 63 with cystic fibrosis. A lot of people die in their 20s from cystic fibrosis, or 30s or 40s. It's a very, very serious disease, and he was having much better outcomes, and he was doing things that were different than the evidence base. You should do this, that, and the other. And Gawande asked him. He just said, he's like, okay, so you're doing something different than evidence-based medicine. Why is that? And the guy sort of like smiled and smirked and just said, if you follow evidence-based medicine, you'll always be 2 years behind the cutting edge. And so he was the one making the evidence. He was the one trying new things and making the new evidence-based protocols for other people to follow 2 years down the line in his footsteps. So that's evidence-based medicine. If you're practicing evidence-based medicine, you're going to at least be 2 years, because you're doing something. Wow, this worked. Here's the study. Takes 2 years, get it published. Okay, that's in the evidence now. Okay, so you're going to be 2, 3 years, 4 years behind the curve, behind the cutting edge. Then guidelines, though. Guidelines are a bureaucratic mess, and sort of every 5, 10 years they'll come together and relook at the guidelines, and they'll say, okay, here are the experts in the field. Give us what you think is the best evidence. And they'll take that, and based on their own personal predilections or their their financial conflicts of interest with different industries, they'll just make whatever guidelines that they want. And so the guidelines are not evidence-based, and they're generally 10 to 15 years behind evidence-based medicine, right? Because they only come around every 5, 10 years. And then how much can you get in there of the current literature? So they're way behind. And so, and they're biased, frankly. And so I've spoken to people that say, well, this goes against the guidelines. It's just like, right, but it goes with the evidence. This is evidence-based medicine. And they're like, oh, you can't go against the guidelines. You can't go against the guidelines. So it's like, well, what if the guidelines conflict with the evidence? I will never not follow the guidelines. I'm like, okay, well, the guidelines are there as a guideline. It means that you don't know what the hell you're doing, and you're not confident in your practice. And so you need to be babied and spoon fed in your practice. That's what following the guidelines is. And it's a good structure, and it protects you, because, I followed the guidelines and it killed 50 people, but they followed the guidelines, like, fine, that protects you. That's a CYA practice, cover your ass sort of medical practice, but it's not necessarily the best thing for your patients. And so I've spoken to people that said, well, this is the evidence, and this is the evidence-based medicine. They're like heads of department, even people in a position where they should know better. They said, I don't practice evidence-based medicine. I practice guideline-based medicine. It's like, well, then you should lose your license, because that's a really bad thing to do. And it's going to be 10, 15 years behind the cutting edge, So it's something that I believe is going to keep changing, but if you want to get something new, you have to try something new. If you want the same results, and keep doing the same thing. But if you're unhappy with the fact that we're getting fatter and sicker than we've ever been in human history, then you obviously need to try something new. And we're getting different results. And I think that's the important thing. And I think a lot of people are seeing that, and they are seeing that people are getting dramatically better, and it goes against the guidelines, and it goes against, what they've been told and taught, but it's happening, and it's true. And that's the only thing that matters. And which is why more and more people are coming to this. And I get more and more doctors contacting me saying, wow, I just came to this, and like, this is something that I want to do, and I've done for myself, and I've done for my patients, and this is amazing, and I'd like to learn more about it. And then patients saying that, they go to their doctor, and their gastroenterologist is saying, hey, the best thing for you to do is go on a carnivore diet. That's going to be the best thing for your Crohn's. It's like, wow, that's amazing. So it is happening, because you cannot ignore the real world outcomes and facts forever. And we're just building up and building up and building up. And we're sort of hitting that critical mass now that people at least know about it. And then people they've known have tried it, and most people have had very positive results. So I think that we're hopefully just about to see an increase in acceptance from the medical community, and more studies are going underway to sort of show the efficacy. I think there's more than enough evidence to show that this is the way to go for yourself and to treat patients with. But, the more studies, the better. The more evidence, the better. And that's great for other people. But I think we're already getting to the point where people can see with their own 2 eyes, wow, this makes a huge difference, and this improves their life. I think the only sort of stitch in that is the whole idea, what about cholesterol and LDL and heart disease? And that's been roundly disproven. Just by so many different ways. But that seems to be like, okay, you're getting all these other improvements, you're improving all these other sorts of things. Ooh, but there's sort of always a bit nervous about that. So people like Dave Feldman, putting out the lean mass hyperresponder studies, that's going to be helpful with that. And as soon as we finally put the final nail in the coffin of that nonsense, that cholesterol causes heart disease, then the floodgates are just going to open with this, I think.
Dr. Chaffee, you mentioned January's World Carnivore Month. We've probably got a lot of people listening who are just experimenting with carnivore for the first time. What's like one piece of advice that you would give to people who are just starting carnivore and just trying to figure it out?
Well, just try to do it as closely to just meat and water as possible. A lot of people think that carnivore is just you eat a lot more meat and you eat more fat than you're used to, but really what it is excluding all these other sorts of things. So it's an elimination diet. As much as anything else, you need to eat meat. You need to eat the fat. The fat's really important. That's another thing. People avoid fat because you're just used to eat the damn fat. It's really good for you. It's an essential nutrient. They're essential fatty acids that you have that you cannot get from anything else except animal fat. And there are essential fat soluble vitamins that you have that you can't get from anything else except animal fat. So you need to eat the fat. You want to eat the fat. You want to eat enough meat, but you also don't want to eat anything else. So my hard rule is no plants, no mushrooms, no sugar or any sweeteners, and nothing artificial. So that goes for sauces, seasonings, and drinks as well. If you want to do this as to the most benefit. And so if you're trying this out for 30 days, I mean, just give it a try and just eat meat. Cut out all the artificial sweeteners. Cut out all any sweeteners and nuts and seeds. And people always ask, well, what about coffee? Well, what about seeds? Well, what about nuts? Well, okay, well, all those things are plants. What about honey? Well, that's sugar, and so on. So. And then obviously, like stevia, like, oh, well, that doesn't count because it's not carbs. It's like, well, it's a chemical and it goes in your body and it has a chemical reaction, and it wasn't there during the last ice age. So I wouldn't use it, and it can cause harm. So I would just try to do it just fatty meat and water. Make sure you're eating enough. It's very easy to undereat on a carnivore diet because your hunger signals just change dramatically. So just keep eating fatty meat until it stops tasting good. Cut out all of the rest and see how you go. You are almost certainly going to feel better than you ever have. You'll likely lose a significant amount of weight, depending on your size, anywhere from 10 to 20 pounds in that first month, especially if you're avoiding dairy. I would cut out dairy as well. That can be a sticking point for weight loss in particular. I mean, dairy is very nutritious, has a lot of good things, but at least initially try it without, and you can potentially reintroduce it and see if it causes a problem. But people with autoimmune issues or weight issues, that can be a sticking point for them is dairy. So just try to just go meat and water, nothing else. Eat enough. Make sure you're eating until fatty meat stops tasting good. Listen to your body, let it tell you how much to eat, and just see how you go and focus on the good things. Maybe you don't lose as much weight as you wanted to, but maybe you're sleeping better, maybe your energy is better, maybe your skin clears up. Maybe your skin doesn't clear up. Maybe you get a bit of a rash, but other things are improving as well. So you may have a bit of a teething issues early on, but you're going to have a lot of benefits as well. So focus on those benefits. You'll work through all the rest of it. There's sometimes you have fat soluble toxins that just sort of live in our fat tissue. And then when you start losing weight, you start losing fat, actually releases these toxins, and that can manifest as skin issues or other sorts of weird muscle aches and soreness and things like that. And just weird sort of symptoms. They go away, once your body works through those things. And so just give it time and just keep it simple. Just eat meat, drink water, don't eat anything else, and see how you go.
And you'll be pissed you haven't done this for years after doing it for 30 days.
I certainly was. Yeah.
Us too. Well, Dr. Chaffee, we could talk to you for 3 hours. We're going to see you in Austin in a couple months, which we're very pumped about, but we appreciate it. We appreciate having people like you out there that are fighting a good fight, really leading this whole movement. You've had a huge impact on both of us and a lot of our listeners, and we just appreciate you making the time.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's always good to talk to you guys, and thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Chaffee.